And I didn't realise quite how much controversy until I started asking various people their views, their opinions, their roles, and the different contract assignments that they have. So when I started this, it was coming from a very personal perspective in that I am a part-time teacher. That already feels like a bit of a confession, doesn't it? As though we're at some kind of AA meeting. So, hi, I'm Charlotte and I'm part-time. And as though it's an admission or maybe a stain or something not as good as, like there seems to be all of these associations with this idea of part-time. So my starting point in preparation for today's show, and there is a lot of preparation that goes into these shows. So when my microphone doesn't work, it's why this is so frustrating. But I asked on social media platform, and you can follow us on Twitter, and I did use the hashtag, so feel free to check these polls out because they were public, they were available to participate in. They have now closed though, sadly. But I asked teachers generally how many of the people I'm in contact with work part-time. And I then kind of felt as though I had to justify that a little bit more. So it had to be, I work part-time, but I actually work full-time hours. So my contract might say that I'm a fractional member of staff, but effectively I'm working full-time hours. So I wanted to make that an option. I also wanted to ask how many people were full-time, and by that I did mean the 40-hour working week, as is standard. But then it made me think that potentially, if a lot of part-time staff work additional hours, so they are fractional on contract but probably work full-time hours, the same could probably be said for full-time members of staff that work more than 40 hours a week. And the statistics showed that. So that was really interesting to get into from a positivist research stance. I do start to feel as though I'm wearing my journalist hat at this moment, but 21% of the people that responded were part-time and said that they stick to their part-time hours. There were 8% of the respondents that said they were part-time but work additional hours. So they work full-time hours on top of the contract and the agreement that they have within their contract. And then there were 35% of the respondents that said that they work and stick to their contractual hours. So they work 35% of the respondents work 40 hours. And then we had 36%, so just into the majority of full-time staff members, but would acknowledge that they work more than their 40 hours a week. So there's not necessarily the expectation, but they do put in the additional hours. So when we start this conversation, thinking about what hours do teachers work and what is the effect of working part-time, I thought it was quite interesting that full-time doesn't necessarily mean full-time. It actually means and more. And that made me think a little bit around why is it that we have full-time teachers working full-time hours are actually doing a little bit more. And one interesting question, so I asked a second question that looked at why do we have to do these additional hours and why have we chosen to go part-time if that has been a choice, because again there were some instances where people were choosing or were having part-time fractional contracts, but actually that was because it was the only contract available, and maybe they would like to be full-time, but the job market just doesn't allow for it. So it was an interesting starting point. And I did start to think about what are the factors behind this. And someone started, and it was a recurring theme, mentioning the word perfectionism. And that perhaps as a career body, as a profession, teachers are afflicted by perfectionism. So we always want to be better. And because we always want to be better, and because there's always room to be better, this is where the extra hours start to come in. Interestingly, Tom, another Teacher Talk host, has been talking this week about acknowledging he's not perfect in every area of his career, and that he recognises that there are some aspects of teaching that he could always improve. Now, if you're always on that idea of there's always something you could do better, and you don't know when to stop, this is when teaching can overtake your life. And that was where this sort of impetus came from. So first message that has come in, this is an interesting one that I would be really keen to chat to you about, is the idea of being part-time and deputy head, so in a leadership role in a primary school, and it works really well. That's great to hear that it's working really well. interesting. Another thing I want to come on to. So this is going to be a bit of a all over show today, I think, because there's so much to talk about. But went part-time after having had a second daughter. 2 assistant head teachers support the leadership on the days I'm not in. That's brilliant. So the idea of having a part-time deputy with that being supported by I'm assuming the assistant heads underneath that, because one of the other questions that I'm hopefully going to get onto today is there potential for progression as a part-time teacher? And with the people that have chatted with me over the last week, that has been a no. It's been a reason not to progress. So, and not because the person doesn't want to, but actually because the SLT of the area has said that that's not okay. We can't do that. You need to be in every day. We need you to be full time in order to be in a leadership role. So that's going to be an interesting one. And I would love to hear your viewpoints on that as deputy head teacher in a primary school. Do you advocate for part-time teachers to be in leadership positions, or is this maybe the beginning of where the stigma of part-time teacher comes in? So if you're a part-time teacher, you can't be in a leadership role. And what does that message, what's the narrative being perpetuated there? Does it mean that you can only be a leader if you're willing to be in every day? Does it suggest that you're not capable of picking up those roles and responsibilities as a leader and handling them efficiently enough that you can be in on a lesser fractional contract? So based on that poll, then I started to question, and I did spend ages looking through all of the different fractional versions of the contract that teachers were sharing with me, that they were saying what contract they're on. And I have to admit, the vast majority were either a 0.6 or a 0.8. And again, I'll get into those in a moment. But there were some really interesting combinations. And I thought it was, again, how is this contract been written up that we've got teachers that are on a 0.36 of a contract? So obviously this must be in response to learner demand and teacher demand and classroom sizes and how many hours they need for a particular subject, or maybe it's job share. But it was interesting to imagine that it couldn't be rounded up and allow that particular individual additional PPA, or maybe even to support the department in a different area. Maybe they don't want to be rounded up, so to take that into consideration as well. But 0.3, 0.36, 0.4 and a 0.5 contract made the equivalent of 11% of the responses that I got. So not necessarily a popular choice. I also work with a colleague that's on a 0.2 contract, and it is the equivalent of 1 day a week. And we will discuss maybe why people get into these fractional contracts in the next one, because this was where the rabbit hole came in, because I was then fascinated by, well, why are we on these fractional contracts? Is it choice, or is it essentially meeting the demand? Now, interestingly, 35% of the respondents that I received on the social media platform were on the 0.6. So as I've said, the 0.6 and the 0.8 are by far the most popular combinations of fractional contract. And I think that's really interesting as well, just as a reassurance for any NQTs, that if you're going into the job market, the chances are you're going to be on a fractional contract. It might not necessarily be full-time teacher. Now, when I started this, I assumed that fractional contracts were largely within FE. So seeing this in mainstream, seeing this in secondary and primary kind of showed up my own ignorance or naivety. And I found the reasons and the comments that came in with this poll really interesting. So, for example, one person said that they work more hours than their 0.6 contract, but see it very much as their own fault. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because that buys back into that idea of perfectionism, and we're only doing the extra work because we feel the burden to be better for our learners. And is that a problem? And why have we got that burden? Who's sending this narrative out that you must be better, you should be better? And why can't we accept that a good lesson is a good lesson? It's good enough. You don't have to be perfect. One of the things I speak with my learners about a lot is perfectionism is being the very best you can be within the context. So actually, within the time that teachers have been given for PPA, perfectionism can still stand. You are allowed to finish your workday, and that you can have a perfect lesson within your context. So if you haven't been given the appropriate amount of PPA, your lesson is perfect within its context. So maybe that's a bit of a controversial comment to make, but it's something that I feel quite passionately about. So do feel free to comment, do feel free to chip in. I can see that quite a few people are responding to that already, so that's going to be really interesting, and I will pick up the comments in a moment. So I'm not ignoring you, I'm just trying to get through my statistics, otherwise I'm going to lose my place. Another colleague of mine said, yes, fractionally they are a 0.6, so it's the equivalent of 3 days a week, and that's their contract and agreement with their SLT. However, what became really interesting is they said, but I often come in to do cover, or I often come in on the 4th day just to catch up with PPA. So they're in their office space. Now, we all know that if you are in an office or a classroom, you are a sitting duck. So you can't necessarily say to somebody, no, it's not my working day, I'm just here to catch up on something, because you're there, you're available. So again, I think teachers are really bad at saying no. I think we're really bad at saying, no, I'm not going to do that because that's not my working hours. So that was an interesting one as well. We also had the antithesis of that, in the 0.6 fractional contract then said that they refuse point blank to work on any other day. So they were working 3 days a week, and I will not work on any other day. Now, that level of discipline, I think, is amazing. It came across a little bit like, no, and I'm not going to do it ever. And so you have that almost very defensive, but I think actually we have to be very protective of our time. And especially, as I've said, if you're in the office, you're in a classroom, have you just got a minute? I just need this. That word just is a real grate on me. I thought it was really interesting in the responses for the 0.6. There were 2 heads of departments. There was a deputy that responded to me on Twitter. So that was really useful to see. And picking back up on one of the listeners today saying that part-time teachers should definitely be able to be in leadership roles. If not, the schools miss out on great leaders, I think is a really valuable point. I think one of the assumptions is that part-time teachers are often mothers, and they're part-time because of childcare. And I would really like to smash that idea, because actually there are a lot of part-time teachers that are part-time teachers because they are doing masters, they're doing own research, they're doing, I love one person called it a side hustle, they're doing their MSc, they're doing their MA, they're writing up their doctorate, they're writing their book, they're engaged in community work. But somehow this message of part-time teachers is the picture of a teacher sat at home doing nothing. Has that maybe been exacerbated by COVID? Have we had this narrative of teachers being lazy? And is that now where we're coming at teachers? So another way to attack teachers is to suggest that part-time means not as good as. So that's really frustrating, because I think when we have these, and to use one of the, as I said, the side hustle, one of the comments from the people on Twitter, is we are in a position to bring so much more to our classroom and so much more to our learners and managers. So we have this experience that we build up that we can make relevant to our classroom settings. So why would you choose to cut that off as an SLT to say, well, we don't want part-time members of staff in leadership roles, when actually the part-time contract means that you're able to upskill in a variety of areas that are going to benefit your staff members, your learners, your community, your parents. So I would argue that we should be able to be part-time and in leadership roles. And maybe we need to unpack this idea of what can we be doing to enhance that leadership role outside of the school setting. But maybe that's a whole other show. I'm only on my maybe 3rd slide of this, of all my statistics, and we're already halfway through. Admittedly, that's possibly because of my ineptitude with technology. If Tom is listening, and sometimes he does listen in later in the day, and he always gives me a little comment as to how I've done in that particular show, he's going to recognise that my area for development will absolutely be technology. A couple of other comments then on the 0.6 contract. Some were saying that they love it, that it's life-changing, the best thing to ever happen. So I wonder if we do have any listeners that are thinking that they're burnt out, that it's a little bit too much, and feel like they have to give up teaching. Maybe they don't have to give up teaching. Maybe they have to give up, firstly, the toxic school that's suggesting that. And secondly, consider that fractal contract and what that then opens up. So we then have the opportunity to develop you holistically as a professional that then is going to benefit the learners in the room and the staff body. So leading on to a couple of the other contracts, and again, these fractions did just make me laugh. So there was a 0.7 contract, a 0.767 contract, a 0.78 contract. And one person said that they leave early on one day and then they have a whole day to do their study. And again, picking up that idea of what are we doing in our inverted commas free time? Because again, I don't think that we ever completely shut off from being teachers, and you would have to listen to last week's show so you can catch up on that to find out how I feel about that. So the second most popular fractional contract, as I've said, was the 0.8. And here we had a deputy, we had one member of staff who is a 0.8 but has a full teacher timetable, so has the teaching commitment of a full-time contract, but doesn't get the PPA. So the thing that is left off of the full-time contract is the planning time, which is truly frustrating. Somebody else admitted that they are on a 0.8 contract but still work every day and Sunday. So that's really soul destroying, I think. And then somebody else, and I love that it was a dad that said that they were 0.8 teacher, 0.2 being schooled by his own boy, which I thought was just brilliant. And also smashes this idea that it's women at part-time for childcare responsibilities. What about the men that are part-time for childcare responsibilities? Why have we got that assumption? And then I'm a 0.9, and it was nice to see that there was quite a few people that were 0.9 and sort of shared the way that they looked at their fraction. And I was kind of blown away because I've been 0.9, so I think I have one afternoon where I can leave just a little bit early, and maybe I start a little bit late on 2 days a week. But there was a genius on Twitter, shout out to that genius, that has a full day off every other week. So I was like, well, that's clever. So it was really nice to see the ways that people make these fractional contracts work for themselves as well. I thought that was really effective. And again, some people were saying it was the best decision that they'd ever had. But I was immediately followed up by someone saying, I hate it. Now, they didn't necessarily say whether they hated it because they wanted more hours or because they wanted less. They just said that they hated it. And then there was one person of my respondents that said they have a 0.94 contract. I'm not really sure how that would work down. How do the hours sort of dispel within there? So that's an really interesting one. Someone else has said that on the chat today, so thank you for those of you joining in the conversation. This is great. And I do like to see that I've managed to find a topic that people feel so passionately about, that we have someone on phased retirement. I quite like the phased retirement, and again, how that disrupts our perceptions and stereotypes, because generally we have phased return or maternity or NQTs being phased in. So the idea that someone's phased out is almost as if teaching is an addiction that they need to be weaned off. I quite like the image. And the way that they were on a 0.35 contract because they didn't want to be in for a full day. Now, what we've seen here is an awful lot of flexibility and negotiation on both the teacher and the SLT side of things. So in the conversations that were happening on Twitter, we had the idea that it was an agreement. It was something that both of the parties wanted. So the teacher is able to meet the demand of the learning requirements, and where possible, the SLT has made those agreements. So people who wanted 2 days off a week, people who wanted a day off a week. Now, interestingly enough, that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to fight for your alignment and to allotment rather, so that you can get what you need for your family circumstances, your personal circumstances, your professional circumstances. And this is where the leadership question came in. So what was interesting then is I was surprised, and I hands up, I was genuinely surprised by how many part-time teachers were in a leadership role. The reason I was so surprised by that is because I was told in one placement that that was never going to be an opportunity, that you can't be a leader on a point whatever contract, on a fractional contract. That's not the way that that particular school, that particular place setting worked. And they weren't prepared necessarily to negotiate it. Now, when I was having a conversation, this is years ago, when I was having a conversation with somebody at the time, they were saying, well, it kind of makes sense because you can't expect a leadership person in a leadership role to be on site only one day, only 2 days a week, because they need to be accessible. And I thought, okay, yeah, but where do we draw that line? So if we say a 0.2, no, you can't be in a leadership role. 0.4, you shouldn't be in a leadership role. Point 6, you can be in a leadership role. Is that with a caveat? Is that with you can be in a leadership role, but you have to be on site 3 days a week. So that's another interesting concept. How do we make that distinction between what you can and what you can't do? And where do you draw the line? Because that's where it becomes really interesting. So because of that, that's where I then put out question number 2. So this is where I started to send out questions to various different people, asking them to participate. And the question was, can you successfully be part-time and in a leadership role? And obviously you have a limited number of characters. So what I was trying to get across there was the successful and part-time. So the idea of, if you're a 0.6, and we agree for this instance, a 0.6 means the equivalent of 3 days a week. And so you're not on site, you're not at your school or college or place of learning for 2 days a week. Can you still be a good leader? Can you still get everything done? And now, interestingly, again, I don't think this is possible, and I'm not really a big fan of positivism, but it didn't feel right to be able to say yes or no. So when I made the options available, you had yes, no, but then also yes, but it requires more hours. So that then kind of undermines this concept of being part-time. So if you were a 0.6, for example, it'd be really interesting to hear from a couple of the listeners. Sorry, I'm calling you learners now. My goodness, this is remote teaching legacy, isn't it? A couple of listeners saying that they're a deputy head teacher. So if you're a deputy head teacher, and I'm not sure if you've said what your fraction is, but if you were a 0.6, is it possible to do everything that's required of you as a leader within those hours? So would you be able to, say, work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not be available Thursday and Friday, and still meet the demands of the role? Because obviously those in leadership, it is a demanding role, and we need to respect that it's a demanding role, but we also need to respect that they are people who are doing those roles. And so there are limits. I hate to tell you, teachers, but you are not actually machines. You will need a break at some point. So I find that really interesting. Oh, brilliant. Thank you for responding to that. Yes, it's great. That message, I think, is really important, not only for those of us that are looking to be in leadership, but as a reminder to those already in leadership that maybe we can give ourselves a break, and that you're not actually at the beck and call of everybody that ever has an email sent to you, and that they can recognize that maybe they're not going to get their reply to their email in 30 seconds after having sent it. So interestingly, now that's an interesting point. If the culture of the school is right, and this is something that I wanted to pick up on again. So thank you for that. That's almost given me a way into the next part. So if we think about this idea of if the school is right, someone was messaging me after having put these questions out there, saying that they wanted to be able to be in a leadership position, but the school's decision meant that they couldn't, so that they weren't able to be in a leadership role on a part-time contract, and they felt as though they'd hit what is known as the glass ceiling. So they got to the point where, even though they had the skills, the experience, the knowledge, and the dedication, the commitment, the passion, all of those additional things that we need to recognize, because of their fractional contract, they weren't able to progress, and they were infuriated by that. And I understand why, because if it is possible to be able to be this fractional contract and a significant high up leader of the school, why is that not being celebrated? Why is that maybe not across the board? And I love that we've got if the culture in the school is right. So that's then opening up. And this is why I was saying this question that started out as, why do people work part-time? What do they do when they're not teaching? Became huge and became all about culture, and it became about women feeling empowered. It came about dads wanting to be dads and being recognized that dads do want to be with their children, and maybe we could change the narrative around that too, and that actually being part-time is not a stain on your character. So I became really inspired by conversations I was having with people over the last few days. Now, if we think about this idea of, is it possible to do, and how do we do it, and how do we engage with it, I think it's interesting to see what other people see it as, and again, being available to different people. So picking up on that point of if the culture of the school is right, then this is where we get that often workplaces, and they are singular workplaces, don't allow part-time members of staff to progress into leadership roles. And I was really curious as to what that suggests about you as a person, that it means that you have to be at the beck and call. I used to work with a gentleman that would send emails out at 4 a.m., at 2:36 in the morning, at midnight, at 7 in the morning. And I started to almost wonder when this guy slept. When is it that he switched off? And he'd recently been appointed into a leadership role. And I worried for him because I thought, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, and I'm hoping that he was waking up in the middle of the night rather than just working through the night, and this was what was on his mind, that's the damage that can happen when we become consumed by, we have to get that thing done. And interestingly, when I was talking to people about why they go to part-time, I asked again, what was it that they were wanting to do? And there was this narrative around they needed to be on a fractional contract in order to uphold all of the responsibilities. So if they worked 4 days a week, they would work the fifth day so that they would be allowed their weekend, which again, I thought was really interesting. So thank you for those of you that are joining the conversation today. So another comment is, as a head of science, I'm on a 0.9 with 1 day off a fortnight. I love that combination. That is a genius combination. And I'm a little bit frustrated that I've never put that combination together. How have I not thought about that? Still do everything I need to in my head of department role, and my secondary department is there on my day off for any emergencies. Quick question. Was it arranged that way? So was it arranged that you would have a deputy there so that the role was always covered? Or my question would be, what is it that, why is there has to be that staff presence? Why would we have to make sure that somebody was there for that thing? Is that not just kind of managed? I almost imagine we're fighting fires all of the time. So, I like this one as well. It's also important for part-time leaders to be properly remunerated. I can't pronounce words, I'm sorry. From September, our school will pay part-time leaders their full-time instead of the pro rata. Yes, to acknowledge the fact that they do a full leadership role. That is awesome. I think we all need to know what school you're at. You might have an influx of applications if you're not careful. That's going to be a really interesting one. And then another comment, there are new flexi working hubs. I like that support schools to implement flexible working for staff in their schools. That's fantastic. I think it would be really interesting to have those conversations, because I certainly recognise, and again in a conversation I was having with somebody last night, we were talking about how it feels sometimes like a fight. You have to go to your manager, your leader, and just say, I need this time off for this purpose, and have to defend your right to be able to do that. So I think that that's really interesting. And that, again, this part-time narrative tends to be around that you're sitting at home and you're not doing anything in the hours that you're not at work, which is simply not the case. I don't know a single teacher that sits at home on the day that they're not working and does nothing. You are normally part-time for a reason. It is normally for study, for other jobs, for other passions, for family, for caring responsibilities. So this idea that part-time means lesser is really frustrating, because actually it probably means that you do more. Because this is where we get into teacher guilt. We tend to start to give ourselves, so if it is a part-time teacher, chances are you're putting as much passion and enthusiasm into the role. You don't just start. But then equally, if your other aspect is, say, study, say you're doing your doctorate, you're not just going to start 9 to 5, you're going to pour yourself into that. So all of a sudden, these part-times often don't add up to one full-time role. I believe that they add up to a lot more than that, and it's often at the sacrifice of something else. I'm absolutely loving talking through these things, and I'm a little bit nervous about putting the news on, because I suspect that maybe I'm going to break the system, but we'll see if it works, and then we'll come back to the last 15-20 minutes of today's show to continue talking about why people go part-time. Does it benefit us? Does it add to our stresses and strains? Does it make us happy? What is it? What's the reason behind it? Because there were quite a few people that were saying 0.6 is the best thing they've ever done, 0.8 best decision they've ever made. So curiously, we're going to talk about why those things are, and why is it that maybe we can't have a really good work-life balance as a teacher that means that we have to be fractional. So that's what's going to happen after the news. I hope you stay with me and I hope you continue to chat us through.
This is Teachers Talk Radio. This is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. Academics from universities across England, Russia, Italy, and Northern Ireland have conducted an investigation into bias when awarding exam grades. The research, based on a study of 1,200 students in Russia, concluded that teacher-rated school achievement might be more influenced by personality than the objective performance measured by a standardized exam, and that teacher ratings might reflect some conscious or unconscious biases, such as judging more leniently students that they perceive as more focused on school tasks, who are well behaved, and who are more emotionally fragile. A professor from Queen's University Belfast did, however, note that the results of the study were not marked enough to say that this bias is making a huge difference to outcomes. Older students at a school in Glasgow have been sent home following rising coronavirus rates in the community. In a letter sent home to parents, the head teacher of Shawlands Academy stated, "We understand that this situation is far from ideal, and we had all hoped that the spread of infection would not increase, but sadly this is not the case in our local area." The overall infection rate across Glasgow currently stands at 109.9 cases per 100,000 people. The head of Pimlico Academy has resigned following the recent race discrimination row. Students at the school took part in a demonstration at the end of March over uniform policy, changes to the curriculum, and the sitting of a union flag outside the building. Many felt the resignation was a long time coming, with the NEU having already passed a motion of no confidence in the head, Daniel Smith. A parent interviewed in The Guardian earlier this week stated that the school needed a leader who was from the same world as the students, so incidents like the uniform policy never happen again. That was your daily education news briefing.
Fantastic. There's some interesting points being raised at the moment, especially about bias and the perspectives that we have of our learners and the things that they're going through. And I think, again, it seems a really pertinent moment to be mentioning these part-time hours because, again, on Twitter and on various social media platforms, you've got a lot of teachers working above and beyond their hours to be able to get these assessments completed. So that would maybe be another poll, wouldn't it, as to how many have increased their hours in order to make sure these deadlines are met. And is that being recognised? Are you being given toil? Are you being given extra time to get on with things that you would normally be doing? That's a really curious idea as well, isn't it? The where we fit demand. I know in one of the questions we were chatting about earlier is the statistics show that when we've got a role that's maybe part-time or fractional, we actually find ourselves coming back in and doing additional things to be able to support where the demand is, where it's present. And at the moment, that's definitely something that we're all going through. We're all going through a more demanding aspect of our teaching career at the moment. We're all probably going above and beyond. But is it being recognised? That would be one of the things I would be really curious to hear about. So maybe if you wanted to, what is being done in your school to recognise at the moment, so specifically with teacher assessed grades, the extra work that you're putting in? Has it been assumed that you will just mark these papers outside your contractual hours? Have you been given extra desk time, PPA time to get these papers marked? I would be really, really pleased to hear from anybody that could comment on that as well. And by the way, do feel free to phone in. It would be great to hear other people's perspectives rather than just me. But let's get on to our third and final poll then for today's show. So this was the research, as I said, I conducted in preparation, and it felt like I'd kind of poked a bear a little bit, that I'd started to have a look at something and then unraveled all of these assumptions and stereotypes and different ideas that we're engaged with. And the third one that came up was, so we've spoken about what contracts people are on, what fractions they're used to, and how they balance their work and their home life or their other duties, other responsibilities. We've looked at whether you can successfully be a leader and be part-time. So what do we have to put in place? So in some instances, it's that there's a deputy that's there that can pick up any slack that maybe needs dealing with in that moment. Maybe it's having the right school culture. Maybe it's having the right team of teachers below you or with you. Maybe would be the better preposition for that. Maybe it's about having a negotiation with your manager. So there are a number of different ways that we look into those sort of ideas. So my third and final my question was, why did people go part-time? And again, picking up on this narrative around why teachers go part-time, and also what it says about the teachers that are part-time. So I did put a range of different things, and I must admit I went in with it a little bit with a bias, because I went in when I gave the options, if it was the only contract available, that full-time would kill me, meaning that the work stresses were just too much for you to be able to be on a full-time contract. So why did you choose to go part-time? Because full-time is just unpalatable. It's just not reasonable. It's not possible to do it. I kind of repeated that by saying, well, I like my sanity. So I like time away from the classroom and away from a school site or a place of education. And then the other one, again, they're very similar, to get a work-life balance. And what I didn't put in there was to be with my child or to be a parent, because I kind of feel as though that is within the work-life balance. But maybe that's a question for future references. How many teachers do we have that are part-time because they want to be parents, or because they want to be hands-on parents? Obviously they are parents already, but that question kind of came up when I was asking this. And again, the messages I received were really interesting and actually quite emotive into the reasons that people had gone part-time. So as I've mentioned already in today's show, we were looking at perfectionism and how teachers can be crippled by perfectionism. So it'd be interesting for anyone that's listening, by sort of show of hands, how many of you would say that you are a perfectionist? Because I think that would be a sweep across the board. A lot of teachers are always, it's kind of part of the profession, isn't it? We're always trying hard. We're trained in reflective practice. We constantly come out of a lesson and go, well, that went well, or obviously sarcastic, or well, that was fun. And then you spend time thinking about how you can improve, and you want it to be better. You want it to be better for your learners, but you also want it to be better for yourself. So that was one of the reasons that came out as to why people went part-time or chose to be part-time. I did also, as I said, mention it was the only contract available. So I would be really curious. And one of the respondents, and maybe I didn't word it very good, because they started saying, well, I'd be really excited to work for you on a 0.4 contract. And I'm like, no, I'm not offering a job. Felt really sad that they thought I was going to offer a job. But there are a number of different reasons that people go part-time, and the work-life balance was an interesting one, because as I've said, we've had the perfectionism. So the idea of you're a perfectionist and you want everything to be perfect. And so because of that, you have the need to be away from your desk and to do that work somewhere else. Now, I started a bit of a debate, because one person was saying that they would only ever do their PPA time at home because they didn't get the interruptions rather. So they wouldn't have someone knocking at the door, students asking, telephone ringing. They needed to be at home in order to be effective at doing their PPA. But then somebody else was saying, no, you need to do your PPA at work because we need to be available for those learners, for those phone calls, for those conversations. So that created this again, the dialogue between these two people saying, well, why would you do your PPA at home? And I was thinking, well, if you're doing your PPA at home outside of your contractual hours, surely that's a luxury that you can afford for yourself. Now, interestingly, or I find it really interesting, so maybe I need to be careful with how I prefix this, is that it was accepted, or the statistics show, that generally you needed to be part-time in order to have the work-life balance. And is that maybe a comment on the teacher profession, that it's not possible to have a healthy work-life balance as a teacher unless you're part-time? Does that not maybe suggest that the demands of the job are just a little bit too high? Is that maybe a controversial thing to say? I'm not sure. It would be good, again, if anybody wants to drop their comments in the chat, or again, phone in. It would be lovely to hear from you. But if we're in a position where, in order to have a decent work-life balance, you have to be part-time, maybe the demands of the role need evaluating. And this is maybe where we need to have a look wider. So is it that everybody in work, everybody who's employed in whatever capacity has to be fractional to have a good work-life balance, or is this unique to teaching? And again, I've said that most teachers could be classed as perfectionists, but we could assume that other professions would be the same. Now, again, the people that I've spoken to about this topic were really pleased that we're going to be talking about it, because there's a lot of pressure around teachers already at the moment. But there's also a lot of stigma, and there's a lot of emotional load. So cognitive load, emotional load, insofar as you don't feel as good as. So if you are the person that leaves early one day a week, how does that help relations at work? Or how does that maybe create a little bit of a barrier for people at work? I know in various workplaces, various settings, I've had the comments of, oh, it's nice of you to show your face. And I think, yes, because I'm a contractual teacher, I work 0.6, so why would I be in here every day? But it is banter. I assume it's banter. I certainly took it as banter. But it did kind of make me feel as though I wasn't as good, as though I'd let the team down in some way. And it is only an offhand comment, and I did brush it aside. But it's, if we build a narrative, if we build a picture around what it means to be part-time, this picture and this narrative could be quite damaging. And when I shared that with someone, somebody else replied with, yeah, I regularly walk in with, oh, hello, stranger. And it is obviously meant in jest, and it is just something that's, I don't know, conversation starter perhaps. But if as a part-time teacher, you are juggling a home life, maybe childcare, maybe studies, maybe caring responsibilities, maybe a different job, and you already feel as though you're not doing everything you could in that capacity, you then walk into a staff office and you're greeted with, hello, stranger, or nice of you to show your face. That's not going to boost you up, is it? That's not going to make you feel any better. And someone did share with me that they feel as though being part-time can actually be really damaging in a guilt capacity, so that it feels as though they're part-time and they're not as good as their full-time equivalent, but they're part-time in order to spend time with their children, and they were also felt as though they weren't as good as they could be as a stay-at-home or full-time parent. So it feels as though these people, and it would be lovely to hear your perspectives on this, if you're working part-time, does it automatically, or does it always feel as though you're always doing something wrong or not as good as? Or another way to beat yourself up, this is another way of kind of putting that pressure on and trying to be as good as somebody whose circumstances are different. So if you've got the teacher that is doing everything brilliantly, they're getting brilliant feedback from learners, their classroom behaviour is awesome, that the SLT think they're brilliant and they're full time, does a part-time teacher maybe start to beat themselves up because they're not that perfect teacher? Now, I would argue, and I realise I'm having a bit of an argument with myself, is that the part-time teacher can equally be the brilliant teacher, the teacher that has awesome behaviour, the one that is loved by SLT, the one that gets brilliant feedback from observations. I'm not suggesting that you can't have both of those things. I'm just curious as to, are we aware of our circumstances that mean that we don't beat ourselves up, and that we can be okay with that? We can be okay with our circumstances, and recognizing that our circumstances change our abilities to perform in certain capacities. So again, that would be a really interesting one to talk through as well. Another comment, the "you're never here" comment, is like, yeah, okay, well, I might never be here, but I don't stop working, and I'm not here because I'm doing something else. And I do wonder if this is a cultural thing within different education areas, in different departments and different ideas. So it would be lovely to hear your experience. Is it that as a part-time member of staff, you're respected? So you're respected for your part-time role, that maybe you're uplifted, empowered by it? Or are you maybe beaten by it? So is it maybe used as a thing against you, like, oh, well, you wouldn't be able to do that project because you're never here? And you think, well, there I am, and I'm very efficient, and I'm pretty good at what I do. I'm pretty sure I could handle that project. There might be a little bit of my experience starting to appear in this, so you've probably picked up on that. So it would be really good to hear from you. If you are a part-time member of staff, do you feel respected as a part-time member of staff? Or do you feel that maybe you're not seen as good as. So is that another narrative that maybe we need to challenge? It would be great to hear from some of you. Feel free to pop that in the chat, or if you want to give me a call for the last 5 minutes of today's show, that would be good as well. Now, again, I've said we're challenging lots of different narratives today, lots of different questions about whether you can be part-time and a leader, or whether you choose to be part-time so that you can have a work-life balance. The other thing that I found really interesting is this idea of being part-time and female. So is it that part-time teachers are the females or the mums? Because again, gets really frustrating for me as a woman, as a feminist, and yeah, I went there. If we have this concept that you're only part-time to be a parent, what about the women that are doing doctorates? What about the women doing masters? What about the women writing books? Why are we not celebrating those other things in life? So the work-life balance, work we understand as a teacher is what you're doing in the classroom. The life could be any number of things. And as we said when we were talking about, is it okay for a part-time member of staff to be a leader? Those other things that we do enhance us as professionals, enhance our experience, enhance what we can offer to our students and our teammates. So it's interesting that there was this idea that it's the women that are part-time. So does a part-time teacher automatically mean female teacher? And interestingly enough, no. Probably not surprising that that's where I come down on this. But statistically, so back to my statistics, obviously I've learned this week how to do percentages. But yes, the majority were female. And we have to maybe look at some of the caveats of where I'm asking these questions. But there were a significant amount of male respondents and also non-binary respondents that suggested that we need to change this conversation about part-time teacher being synonymous with mum, not just parent, but with mum, because it does seem to show. And as I mentioned before, that 0.8 member of staff that said, yeah, I'm a 0.8 being 0.2 being schooled by my son, that was a dad. And I thought, how refreshing is it to get that experience? Next week's show, I want to be talking about guilt and the mum guilt and teacher guilt. So feeling bad for not marking papers on a Sunday, feeling bad that your lesson didn't have 3 Kahoots, a peer deck and a Padlet wall. Oh well, feeling bad about all these things. These are the ways that we beat ourselves up. So what I thought was interesting was when we have this part-time narrative of how we start to make ourselves feel bad about something. Now, thank you for contributing to this. So in the chat, definitely more part-time people at school are women. Went part-time after having my daughter, but I really wish I'd done it earlier. The day off would have enabled me to do all sorts of extracurricular things. But before having children, it never occurred to me to even ask for it. How interesting. Thank you so much for putting that forward, because do we ask for it? As I said when we were talking about, if we're working full-time and to get the work-life balance, you have to be part-time. What does that say about the teaching profession? To me, it's a message saying, maybe this is too much. Maybe we've added so many responsibilities to what it is to be a teacher that in order to have a work-life balance, you have to be part-time. I would actively encourage anybody that's full-time and feeling as though they have to give up teaching because it's just too hard to maybe consider, no, you don't have to give up teaching. Maybe you need to give up the full-time contract. Maybe start to ask those questions of, can we have a part-time contract? I've had conversations before where I've gone to a manager and said, my workload's just too much. I'm burning out. I can't keep up with this. And then I was told maybe I should get out of education. I'm not sure that's the best piece of advice I've ever been given, because I do love my job. I love being a teacher, and I would happily recommend being a teacher to anybody, as I'm sure people listening to the show as Teachers Talk. We all love our jobs, but for the most part, we love our jobs. The demands, the pressures, the stresses, we probably don't love as much. So that question, I think, where we can negotiate our timetable and make it fit so that we can be reminded that we are people and not robots, would be really useful. So I think that message of never having considered asking for a part-time contract before having had your child is really important. So I would actively encourage any teachers at the moment, and obviously take this with a pinch of salt, because right now life is hard for teachers. We recognize that life is hard for teachers at the moment. You are being asked to go above and beyond expectations. You are being asked to do things that the awarding bodies should be doing. You are being asked to work more hours. I would hope that you have those conversations with your managers, that maybe recognize that that's what you're doing and hopefully reward you. But if you spend at the end of your academic year a little bit of time reflecting on your contract and is full-time allowing you to get what you want to get out of life, not just work, but does it give you space to breathe? Maybe have these conversations, because being part-time, not a bad thing. Being part-time allows for so many other things, and it doesn't make you lesser. It means that you have more experience, more strings to your bow that you can bring to your classroom. I'm a big advocate for part-time teachers because I think it does give us the opportunity to still be passionate about our subjects and still be passionate about our profession without having to completely destroy who we are and what we're doing. We are not martyrs. So please remember that you are allowed a life. So I think on that message of you are allowed a life, we will end the show. Thank you so much for everybody that has sent messages in today, that has been involved in the conversation up to this show. It's been really interesting getting different perspectives, different insights, people's experiences. And I hope that it's been a really positive message that you can be part-time and a leadership. You can be part-time and respected. You can be part-time and passionate. That's something that is possible. It's achievable. So that's where I'm going to finish the show. Sorry again for the technological hiccups at the beginning. And like I said, thank you so much for sticking with me. Until next week, have a good one.